In the spring of 1887, the Hartwell family, living in rural Pennsylvania, made a discovery under their farmhouse that would go on to divide their community for decades. What they uncovered beneath those floorboards wasn't treasure, wasn't bones, and wasn't anything that could be easily explained. It was something far more disturbing, the deliberate, methodical hiding that suggested someone within their own home had been concealing a truth so deep that an entire second structure had been built to bury it. The question that stayed with everyone who heard the story was simple yet impossible to answer. What were they so desperate to conceal? And for how long had they been keeping it hidden? Before we go further into the story of the Hartwell family and the secrets buried under their home, if you're listening from Pennsylvania or any of the neighboring states, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know which state you're tuning in from, and whether you've ever heard hints of old family secrets in your own community. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and let's uncover this mystery together. The Hartwell property sat on 80 acres of gentle farmland near the border of Lancaster and Lebanon counties, a region where the landscape rolled in soft waves and the forests pressed close to the open fields. The main house had been built in 1823 by Nathaniel Hartwell, a man whose name appeared so often in county records that it suggested both prosperity and caution. He had bought the land from a family named Cly, who had abandoned it quite suddenly in 1821 after a fire destroyed their original home. The Hartwell house that rose in place of the Cline dwelling was built with stone foundations and timber framing, solid construction meant to last for generations. The stone foundation had been laid by masons brought in from Lancaster, skilled workers who understood the unique challenges of building on Pennsylvania's rolling terrain. The limestone came from quarries just 10 miles away, and the workers took their time, ensuring every stone was properly fitted and the mortar between them would hold for centuries. The timber for the frame came from the property itself, massive oak and chestnut trees felled and milled on site. The wood was aged before use, a practice that had become less common by the 1820s, but Nathaniel Hartwell insisted on it, believing that properly aged wood would resist rot and warping far better than freshly cut timber. By 1887, the house had passed through 3 generations of Hartwells. The current occupant was Thomas Hartwell, a 63-year-old man who had inherited the property from his father, Samuel, in 1869. Thomas was a methodical farmer, the kind who kept detailed records of crop yields and livestock counts, attended the Methodist church in town every Sunday without fail, and had married late in life to a woman named Catherine, who was 20 years his junior. They had no children together, though Thomas had 2 adult sons from his first marriage, both of whom had moved west to Ohio and had little contact with their father. The relationship between Thomas and his sons had been strained for years, ever since their mother's death in 1856. Thomas had remarried within 2 years, a decision his sons viewed as a betrayal of their mother's memory. The older son, William, left for Ohio in 1860, taking a job as a clerk in a mercantile business in Columbus. The younger son, Robert, followed 3 years later, seeking work in the growing industrial sector. Neither had returned to Pennsylvania for more than a brief visit, and both made it clear they had little interest in inheriting the family farm. Catherine Hartwell was the kind of woman who drew attention without seeming to seek it. She was intelligent, well-read, and came from a merchant family in Philadelphia before her marriage. Neighbors noted that she seemed somewhat out of place in the rural community, that she kept to herself more than was typical, and had a peculiar habit of walking the property alone in the early mornings, often carrying a leather journal she would write in while sitting beneath the old oak trees. She wasn't unfriendly, but she was distant in a way that suggested she was always thinking of something else, something that occupied her mind even as she performed the duties of a farmer's wife. Catherine had been married once before, to a man named Richard Ashton, a lawyer from Philadelphia who died in 1878 from complications related to pneumonia. That marriage had lasted only 4 years, and Catherine had been a widow for 7 years before marrying Thomas Hartwell. She had no children from her first marriage, and there was some speculation in the community about why a woman of her intelligence and apparent means had chosen to marry a rural farmer nearly 20 years her senior. Some suggested she had married for security, having been left with limited financial resources by her first husband. Others suggested companionship, having been lonely in her widowhood. A few, more unkindly, suggested she had married because no other man of suitable station would have her. The farmhouse itself was a 2-story structure with a wrap-around porch, the kind of home that looked both welcoming and somehow guarded. The interior was arranged in the typical fashion of the era, a large kitchen and dining area on the ground floor, parlor for receiving guests, and several bedrooms upstairs. The cellar beneath the house was accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, and there the family stored root vegetables, preserved goods, and their trade tools. The floorboards of the main living area were original to the house, worn smooth by decades of footsteps and maintained with regular oiling and careful sweeping. The kitchen itself was the heart of the house, a large room with a cast-iron stove installed in the 1860s, replacing the original fireplace. The walls were painted a pale cream color, and the windows looked out onto the eastern fields, where the morning sun would stream in during the early hours. It was in this kitchen, on a Tuesday morning in late April of 1887, that everything changed. That spring, a section of the kitchen floor near the eastern wall began to show signs of rot. The boards had started to warp, and there was a faint smell of dampness suggesting water damage from the spring thaw. The winter had been particularly harsh that year, with heavy snows and temperatures plunging well below freezing for extended periods. The spring thaw had been equally severe, with rapid snowmelt causing water to seep into the foundation and up through the floorboards. Thomas Hartwell, being a practical man, decided the boards would need to be replaced. He enlisted the help of a local carpenter named Henry Voss, a man in his early 40s who had worked on several homes in the area and was known for his meticulous attention to detail. Voss had built a reputation for honesty and craftsmanship, and he was one of the few tradesmen in the area who could command premium prices for his work. He had learned his trade from his father, who had learned it from his father before him, and the Voss family had been building and repairing homes in Lancaster County for 3 generations. Voss arrived at the Hartwell house on a Tuesday morning in late April, accompanied by his apprentice, a young man named William Klein, a descendant, as it happened, of the family who had owned the property before the Hartwells. William was 17 years old, the son of a local blacksmith, and had been apprenticed to Voss for just over a year. He was a quick learner, attentive to detail, and eager to master the trade. He was also, as it would turn out, the kind of young man who could not keep secrets. Catherine Hartwell seemed unusually anxious about the work. She hovered near the kitchen as the men began prying up the damaged boards, repeatedly asking if they were certain they couldn't simply repair the existing floorboards rather than replace them. She offered to pay extra if they could avoid removing the boards entirely. Thomas, who was in the barn attending to his livestock, was not present to hear these concerns. He had left early that morning to check on a sick cow and would not return until late afternoon. Voss, accustomed to homeowners' concerns about disruption and expensive repairs, assured Catherine that the boards would need to be replaced, that attempting to repair them would only delay the inevitable, and that the sooner the work was done, the sooner the problem would be resolved. He was professional but firm, and Catherine seemed to accept his judgment, though her anxiety did not fade. As Voss and his apprentice worked, they discovered something unexpected. Beneath the original floorboards lay another layer, a second floor constructed from different wood and showing signs of age that suggested it had been there for decades. The space between the two floors was only about 8 inches deep, but it was enough to contain something. The wood of the lower floor was darker, more weathered, and showed signs of having been deliberately covered rather than simply abandoned. Voss called out to Catherine, asking if she knew about this hidden space. She came to the kitchen doorway, looked at the exposed space beneath the floorboards, and her face went very pale. She gripped the door frame as if she needed it to hold herself up. Without answering Voss's question, she turned and climbed the stairs to her bedroom, and the sound of the door locking behind her echoed through the house. William Klein, the apprentice, was the one who first reached into the space between the floors. He was young, curious, and not yet old enough to understand the weight of discretion. His hand emerged holding a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, the fabric yellowed with age and brittle to the touch. The oilcloth had been carefully folded and tied with twine that had long since hardened and become brittle. Inside the wrapping, there was clearly something substantial, papers, it appeared, written documents of some kind. Voss took the bundle carefully from his apprentice's hands and began to unwrap it slowly, revealing layer after layer of yellowed oilcloth. Inside were documents, letters, it appeared, written in a careful hand on paper that had yellowed but remained legible.